everyone. Ariel Adams here with the Superlative podcast. Be sure to listen to aBlogtoWatch's other podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest news and reviews. Today on Superlative, my guest is Zach Smith. He is the founder of Our Precision in Ohio. Zach, welcome.
Thanks, Ariel.
So I'm hoping to have a very... I've been cautioned against using the word nerdy. Some people feel like it's actually a derogatory term. So I'm going to try not to use the word nerdy as much, even though I don't feel that it's a bad thing. But I want to have a very technical conversation. I want to get really on a micro level into watch parts and manufacturing. I want to use the word geek out. This is another derogatory thing. Are there any safe words for being obsessive into details?
No, you're good. I would say the same.
But what are the safe words? What can we say where we're not afraid of offending someone? We're like, you're hyper detail obsessed like me.
Probably just, I don't know. I'm a watch nerd, watch geek, so I don't really have another word to describe it.
So are you hyper detail obsessed as I described?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And have you always been this way?
Yeah.
Okay. What are some of the ways it manifests itself before watches and watchmaking entered your life?
I had a small machine shop in my parents' garage growing up, and
that's fortunate.
Yeah. So just out of high school, I was always obsessed with detail, whether it was working on electronics projects, micro soldering, or just various, whether it's engine building or making components on the milling machines in the garage. And so watchmaking and making watch parts came naturally.
Now, was that already part of your family? Did you sort of pick up the stuff, or did you acquire these machines?
I acquired these machines. It was an interest of mine, and I ventured out and found them used locally and got into it.
Wow. How did you convince your parents you weren't going to cut your fingers off?
It wasn't easy. When I came home with this equipment, my mom wasn't amused that I took up one side of the garage. And in time, she realized that it wasn't such a bad idea after all.
And how did you get training? Were there local classes? Did you teach yourself? I mean, this stuff is not exactly user-friendly sometimes.
I got some books from my uncle. My uncle was he had a manufacturing company in Miami, Florida, which is where I'm from. And he passed down some literature. I read through it and then just trial and error.
That reminds me how amused I am that the University of Miami is in Ohio. So you were fortunate to pick up some type of a manufacturing bug, we'll call it that, at a young age, a tinker. I had my own background in that, though I did not go so far as to have machines to make parts. That's a rare story, right? Like, I don't think your friends were also, as a hobby, collecting used industrial equipment.
No, it was really challenging to find friends at that age that could relate.
So what were you doing? Were you fixing stuff? Were you making parts? Like you collected all this equipment. You learned how to use it. Obviously, you had some type of goal. What does a teenager want to do with this stuff?
So I just wanted to. I was already into watches at that point.
Already?
When I really started to get into it, I started back in 2010. And when I started to get the industrial equipment going, I decided that I wanted to try to start making watch components, and I realized it was much harder than I expected. So
a lot of people come to that conclusion. Let me ask you this. It is hard. Why does it appear easy?
I'm not sure. I think until you really try, I'm not sure. I really don't know.
I've heard a lot of times, I don't want to use the word cocky because I don't think it's the right term, but confident young engineers who are familiar with some of the, contemporary equipment, CNC machines and all the fancy stuff. And they look at watches and they honestly feel in many instances they can sort of reverse engineer the manufacturing. And most of the time they're quite humbled. And I don't think if there's anything wrong with any of the individuals, they're coming to this conclusion. But when I see this stuff, I don't think that looks easy. I recognize to make it in volume with the right finishes, to make it cost effective, it's super not easy. So I'm just wondering, what is it that they're seeing that I'm not that makes a lot of people, again, initially, fallaciously, believe that these are easy to make?
The Dunning-Kruger effect is real. That's all I can say. It's really, people, they really overestimate their abilities coming into this. And like you said, they're humbled when they are met with disappointment. And it could just be that you're looking at the components and how hard can this be? I've made other things, especially seasoned engineers. I've had people that I've worked with who are engineers that have looked at this stuff and said, yeah, I can do it. And then they try and do it. And they're like, wow, this is actually really challenging.
I've heard that a lot. And I think that's one of the interesting things about engineering is because the pursuit is about predictability and making machines that you understand will work. Yet when it comes to manufacturing, it's an enormous amount of I have no idea. I think maybe trial and error and testing and patience is such a crucial element here. And when there are people that attempt to make stuff, find it challenging, that challenge actually hooks a lot of people, right? They're like, oh, this is intellectually interesting. I think if it was easy, people would sort of come and go faster, but we have people that dedicate their lives to matching what's in their mind with their ability to make it. And I think that results in a lot of, fantastic watches, not to overly romanticize how this all works, but I think that people dedicate their lives to a career, which is a hobby, because of that kind of, I want to do it. There's that challenge. There's always something to do a little bit better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's never good enough.
Yeah. And that's a wonderful thing. So let's talk about your formal entrance into making your career about watchmaking. It sounds like, again, in high school and prior to high school, your watches, you're starting to fix them. How did this blend in with formal education? How did you make career decisions? Talk a little bit how you went from obviously what was a clear plan when you were a teenager to right now being the founder of a company, Our Precision.
Sure. So it wasn't exactly a straightforward path. Okay. I started back in 2010 when I was in high school. I was on a job release program where I could work after my first 2 classes. In the morning, I worked at a jewelry store and worked from that jewelry store, then moved to another facility that did wholesaling of pre-owned certified Rolex. So we were processing between 300 and 500 Rolexes a month, selling them to the chain stores.
I imagine these were not highly competitive positions in the sense there weren't a lot of qualified people that could do these jobs. So even you with limited experience were able to get these jobs because maybe no one else was there that could do it?
I was learning as I was going. I was really lucky to have 2 mentors that saw something in me.
Okay.
And without them, it would have never happened. So that's, really, I owe it to them being where I am today because they took a chance with me. And after being able to be in those positions and learn all that I learned, I was then able to take that knowledge and go to a watchmaking school. And then I got my WOSTEP certification. And after getting that, I graduated, worked for Omega, started a business here in Ohio doing business-to-business watch repair. Realized it was really challenging to get components from Rolex because I couldn't get a parts account from them, even with my certifications. And that's when I decided to pivot the business from making just one-off parts into doing contract manufacturing and making multiples of watch components.
So here's a question, and we've talked about, I've written about it, it's not a new issue, this issue about third-party watchmakers not being able to get parts. That's above and beyond this conversation. It's a very deep issue. I've written essays specifically on this, but I think it's important to say that if you are a watchmaker, you can't just go to these companies and say, hey, Rolex, I'm fixing one of your watches, send me some parts. That was the case historically in many instances where you sort of have an account with them and they trust you. Nowadays, Rolex and others, if you want to get your watch repaired, it has to be through them. And while that's actually not always the best in terms of time or money and sometimes quality, they're the only ones that has access to the parts. You can make new parts, sure, but there's this interesting situation out there, which I think is quite dysfunctional, where a lot of great people like you and others would actually spend a lot more time fixing these watches if you could, and only a few of you end up being super entrepreneurial and figure out, we'll call it ways around it. My question is, if the world was a bit different and you were able to easily get those Rolex and Omega parts, the situation was different. They didn't try to turn that into another profit area. What do you think you'd be doing? Would you still happily be repairing those watches?
I probably would be.
Okay.
So in a way, I'm grateful for how it turned out. If I had access to those parts, I would probably have a few watchmakers working here, but it's hard to say.
Yeah. Yeah. What was enjoyable about that? Was it sort of you can make money just by fixing stuff. People get delighted by it. I talk a little bit about the emotional appeal of doing that type of watchmaking job.
Repair is very different from making new components because you're always trying to find the problem, and it's not evident. Where in serial production, you're going to notice more times than not where there's going to be an issue during manufacturing and inspection. Versus when you're repairing a watch, there's a hidden surprise that's usually caused by wear or breakage. And breakage is pretty evident, but if it's a very slight cause of wear, it creates a mystery, and you're trying to find it. So it's a lot of fun trying to solve the puzzle, if you will. And that's really what drew me into it anyway. And then there's the business aspect to it, where especially if you're working across brands, it's a little more challenging. But if you're working just on Rolex or just on Omega, there's a consistency to the amount of repair, to the types of repairs that are coming in. And it's easier to scale a business as long as you can find people to hire. And then the other aspect is parts. Sorry.
Right. Now, Ohio is today in a lot of ways a hotbed for American repair. We have Stoll, which is also in Ohio and stuff like that. Ohio obviously has this long legacy going back a long time of manufacturing and stuff like that. My question is, has that part of the culture always been there and is now finding new ways to assert itself, or is it actually rebounding? Is it lost for many years and now, for whatever reason, maybe it's cost of facilities and stuff like that, this more engineering mindset is returning to the region?
It's hard to say. I mean, Stoll is the only big repair company that I know around here. One of my fellow classmates from watchmaking school is working at that facility. I think there's Diamond Cellar. They have an operation here. But other than that, I don't really know of an outfit that is doing anything at scale.
I mean, but just that alone is a lot given the presence of the United States. You have, of course, in Texas, mainly in the Dallas area. You have some stuff in Florida, namely around Miami. A couple of there's almost nothing on the West Coast. There's in our Rolex repair facility here in Los Angeles, but given the size of the country, there's a small smattering of these types of businesses. So just that you and a few others are in Ohio, that comparatively speaking is kind of, you're popular out there.
Yeah, it's a blessing to be able to have what's here in the shop and to have the opportunities that I do.
How did you feel when you recognized that the Swiss weren't going to be able to sell you those parts? Or was it that you came in so early, you'd never seen what it was like before, you'd never had the relationship where you could buy the parts, and you weren't really sort of upset about it? I'm just wondering if there was an emotional reaction, because a lot of watchmakers, especially those who had those rights taken away, I mean, they flipped out. They went on whole crusades. I mean, there was on forums years ago, over a decade ago, long essays, emotional pleas and stuff like that. Like, this was career changing for many people.
I did see some of this online researching it. It was part of the process. When I started looking into getting parts accounts, Omega was the first one that I was looking to get, just because it's a little easier to go into. Rolex wasn't a possibility at the time. A few years sooner, when I started, I was able to potentially get a Rolex parts account, but it didn't really affect me emotionally. It's purely business. And I try not to bring my emotions into business when making decisions. So it didn't make sense cost-wise to get the parts accounts for Cartier, Panerai from like Richemont Group and from Omega versus what it was going to cost me just to get set up with just maybe one machine. It was like splitting hairs. So plus with my previous experience, there wasn't a huge leap there wasn't a skill gap of trying to learn all this stuff, like it would be from starting from zero.
So at some point you made the decision where you said, I'm going to make stuff. I'm going to make my career about having a facility with machines and people that know how to use them. And I'm going to find clients to make parts. Talk about some of the practicalities that go into doing that. I mean, obviously this is an endless conversation, but how did you come to that decision? And what were some of the first things you did to build a factory, really? So
I have a very untraditional way of acquiring equipment, and my favorite way is to acquire things that are broken and to fix them.
Okay.
So everything in this place, at one
Like
point
on eBay where it says parts only?
No, that would have been much easier. It was by word of mouth. At least, so the milling machines that I'm using today, that are the brand Kern, I was able to have a connection through them that started from my friend Brad. His name's Bradley Taylor. I don't know if you know of him. He's a watchmaker in Canada.
Okay.
He's in Vancouver. He owns a brand. And he made the connection to Kern, which is a CNC machine tool company.
Right.
That's based out of Germany. And many of the big brands, including IWC, and you can use your imagination, all the big brands, I can't really say their names, are using these milling machines to make their watch parts. And they're prohibitively expensive for someone that is starting off like me or started off like me. And so he made the connection, and I started off with one machine that was broken, and I heard about it through him. He referred me to a salesman at Kern, and then the salesman then told me it was located in California. I flew out to California and decided to take a risk on the machine, and had it shipped back to Ohio, and had no experience with these machines, but I have previous experience with electronics repair. So I dove in, and in a week I was able to get it running, and I started making watch parts. And
what was wrong with it?
It had a problem with the emergency circuit.
Okay.
So there's a 24-volt circuit that goes throughout the machine, and all of your emergency stop buttons are wired into that circuit. And there was a failure in the power supply. So after I was able to fix that, it was just some random things like airlines for the tool changer, and some solenoids, but it was very basic. It wasn't any...
Did you buy the part? Did you have to sort of resource one? Because I mean, are those just, general universal electronic parts?
No, this is from 2000s, 1990. So I actually had to repair the board. Okay.
Oh, wow. You soldered it and stuff like that?
Yeah, I replaced the circuit board components, capacitors.
So that's above and beyond what your average tinkerer can do.
I wouldn't say that.
I can replace parts, but I'm not doing any type of parts repair. Like, that's way beyond my understanding of electronics.
I don't know. What do you have to lose, right? You already have this thing here, and you got to find a way to do it. So it's you either find a way to do it or find someone else.
I'm impressed.
That can.
I'm just saying, I'm impressed. That's good.
Thanks.
So you got it working, and that means you got a machine that buying it in a working condition would have been unaffordable.
Yes. Yeah, it would have been pretty expensive at the time. And then 3 months later, Kern calls me. They said they have another machine that they're not comfortable selling or warranting. In other words, it was not working. And would I be interested in it? And I told them I had to think about it, because it was like a lot more money than what it cost me to get the other machine. And I thought about it for a week, and then called them back and took a risk and said, yeah, I'll take it. And 3 days later, it showed up. It shipped from their facility. They have a facility here in Chicago. So a rigger, it's like, I think 4,000 pound machine, and it's like epoxy granite, pretty heavy. So it's like, it would be a really big heavyweight if you can't fix it.
So you grew out of the garage a long time ago. You probably also had to hustle to find a facility. You're lucky that you're in a part of the country which isn't in New York, Los Angeles, real estate for large spaces. What was the strategy for getting a place? Because as people know, a factory can't just be any old facility. It needs to have hard floors, enough electricity, various types of other codes and things like that. Like, what was the strategy there?
So it took 3 moves. From 2019 was my first, I was working out of a 2-bedroom apartment, and that's where I was doing repairs with 3 CNC machines in one of the bedrooms.
Wow.
So my wife was not amused. And then my second move was I had 2 office suites that was in a medical building. And then my third move was it's in a commercial park, like an industrial park, in a 1,500 square foot space. And then now I just did my 4th move last month into a bigger facility.
And each time you move, what do you really learn about this? Actually, that moving, as annoying as it is, you probably learned and matured a lot quite fast. What are you learning about doing this in a stable way? Because, at some point, and I realize this, it's sort of like you have to hustle to start a new business, right? But once you get going and you're a small to medium business, you can no longer rely on hustling. You just sort of have to do things the right way because everything else is too time consuming and you can't go fly out to places to evaluate, can I fix this problem? So what are you learning about more stable business continuity, so to say?
Better organization. It's something that I really pay for. Especially this relates to moving, is just being lean with the amount of stuff that you keep and just picking and choosing. If you're not touching it for a year, put it on the shelf. If it's any longer than that, it's probably time to throw it away if it doesn't have a purpose. And that also goes with just keeping track of jobs and how you're organizing. I guess, you're relating this to moving or facilities or...
I think it's important what you're saying. It's just in general, to be profitable, what you do requires a lot of efficiency. You have to be open-minded and do interesting projects. But to make money, the costs are high. These machines operating at space, I guess the point I'm trying to make is you can start super lean and agile, but at some point, any factory has high overhead. It's just ongoing costs. And to maintain that, you need to be able to accommodate those costs through, whatever it is you're making. So you're on the way there. I'm just curious about how you're faring all this because, in Switzerland, there's a lot of protections, but still a lot of suppliers scramble, have issues, and then someone else comes in and swoops them up. And that's a common situation in Switzerland where entire suppliers are purchased, as you know, sometimes in a distressed situation because they've sort of overspent. So when you're doing this so hands-on, you have a feel, you have your finger on the pulse of all the cash flow, what you can afford, and you're realizing like that can only be spread so thin, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's being very conscious of how you spend your time and on each project, and then also how much of a percentage you're splitting up between different industries. In my case, so I'm doing contract manufacturing for other industries other than watches, and it's just diversifying risk. Everything is risk, and just being able to figure out how to move ahead with jobs and just being able to allocate your time. So just kind of understanding how much time a project is going to take and the resources that it's going to take before getting paid. And if that is the case, and just not putting all your eggs in one basket, basically.
Now, looking at some of these other industries, we're not talking about the watch industry. In what instances would it be in their interest to go to you? Obviously, you're not a historical medical parts supplier, aerospace, but it seems that you can do something very specialized that they either can't do or can't do at the cost that they need. Where do you serve in terms of having value to these obviously very large and well-established industries that have, networks of suppliers going back many, many decades?
It's flexibility. How much does it cost to have somebody that is either union or paid a very high salary at some of these companies? Or maybe they're doing parts that they can't afford to send out because they have to make them so cheap. And someone like me or someone else might charge too much money, and it gives them the flexibility to be able to move quicker.
How do they find you? I mean, requires lots of relationships for them to call you up and be like, Zach, I got something for you. Like, how did they know that you're the guy for this project?
So there's some history where I've done some contract repair work for Kern. And after I fixed these machines, they offered me a job. And I told them no.
That's nice of them.
Yeah, it was great. And Tony, who's the CEO here in the US, he offered me the ability to do contractor type work. And this was better because it was flexible during a time when I was transitioning from watch repair into contract manufacturing. And it opened up a lot of doors because I met a lot of these companies who were in need of parts, and maybe they were at capacity or they needed some more flexibility. So that was one way. And then once I started doing jobs, people talk. Engineers talk. And
it's all referral.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm fascinated by it, and I think it's important because there's a lot of people that I think would like to pursue something like you, but it's difficult to know how to get the business, and of course, starting the machine shop is tough. So let's fast forward to watches now. You're doing some other stuff. I feel like your passion right now is watches. How do you grow the business? You can't be the all-purpose watch supplier. Like, when does someone come to you? What do you do? What is your specialty as a supplier? Help others in the space know when they should call Zach.
So I can help from inception to production.
Okay.
I have a very nice gentleman named Alex Voss who helps me with design, and he's got some people that help him with typeface, such as Samuel, if you're familiar with him. I'm not sure his last name, but he's pretty well known in the watch industry. I think he's in England. And Eric, who does some modeling. And so Alex is pretty involved with design. I rely on him to be able to help me with some of these projects that I'm working on from the inception.
So this is what we'll call the creation of the technical schematics.
So Alex is more visual design. He can do some technical work. He's done a really fantastic job. I know he's going to be listening to this, and he's done a great job in the past. Some really impressive work with technical drawings. But usually, I'll review all this and prepare it for manufacturing in a process called design for manufacturing.
Okay.
So this way, we figure out tolerances for gaskets, for like a case, or like fitting jewels into the movement. And then most of the reverse engineering for movements is done here in my facility because I have the equipment.
So I just think it's important for people to understand you go from a visual idea to having a technical drawing, which again is a more specific one that allows you to think about how it's going to be made, to figuring out how to make it. And that's there's a lot of steps, right? It's not just like we're going to take the scan and put it in the machine and something pops out. Like it's I don't know the proper terms, but it's basically the path to industrialization, which is being able to make the thing in reality that you want.
I wish it was that easy. And a lot of people, I read comments saying, if it's made on a CNC machine and it's not made the Daniels way, you just push the green button and it pops out apart. And
oversimplification.
I'm not going to lie. I thought that it was that easy too going into it. And then I was like, wait a second. I have the best machines you can buy for this. And even then, there's so many iterations that have to be done still. And you have to sit there. And even today, I was making some fixturing for dials, and you overlook something, or no tool is exactly 1 millimeter. So you have to sit there and play with it until the features fit together when you're making an assembly. So, it is a very long process. And I think a lot of people going into this think it's going to cost way less, and it's going to take less time than it actually does.
I want to help put that into context for people who may not know exactly what we're talking about. There's a couple of different elements here. One is, because a watch movement requires such small tolerances, or pretty much anything on a watch requires such small tolerances, a certain type of high precision manufacturing needs to be taken into account. Most manufacturing does not require things to be within a fraction of a millimeter. But in watchmaking, that makes all the difference. So the first challenge is in making things consistently to the exact size you need, which is, again, easier said than done. The other side of it, which is a similarly challenging but completely different issue, is what I'll call finishing. And especially parts you see need to look a certain way. And there's both aesthetic and functional reasons, but the finishing, the surfacing, if you will, on the part which has been cut or polished has to be very, very specific. And again, it's not just polish. There's many different types of polishes and many different ways of achieving a polish with upsides and downsides. And some of the nicer ways take a huge amount of time. And then you have to think about how you do it more efficiently. So the tolerances, as well as we'll call the finishing, two separate areas that are incredibly complex. Let's not even talk about slight differences in materials, different alloys and grades of metal that change the dynamics of it. But am I missing anything that's a really big part of it?
No, it's the finishing is one of the most time-consuming parts of this. And whether you're doing it from a automation standpoint, and automation as well, like making parts, but I'll touch that in a second. Automation takes so long, and usually it doesn't make sense to automate things unless they're in quantities of 500 to 1,000, like minimum, and even 500 is a small number. And you really have to painstakingly sit there and do a lot of this by hand. And whether that means using a machine with a rotating spindle with abrasives by hand, where your hand is on the artifact, or sitting there with a buffing stick or some pegwood or gentian wood or lapping film and applying some of these finishes to the bevels or the tops of the bridges. So
I want to say that even the biggest volume producers in Switzerland still rely on, we'll call it hand labor for many, many things. I was very impressed visiting Rolex, where people by hand polish each case. It's interesting because you take the watch in your hands and there's sort of a moving brush. That's the typical way that the cases get polished. And there's no one way of doing it. It's the angle, it's how long it's being held, it's the twirl of the hand. And as much as they want a machine to do it, it's actually cheaper at the end of the day to have a human do it. That's how difficult it would be to get a machine to consistently do it. So they have this, room full of these highly trained people that just make sure that case is polished the right way. So it's a very, very fascinating thing. And I think it's a wonderful thing because we buy these products because of the amount of hand effort, that there's still a lot, of course, in the movement production and sometimes the finishing, there's a lot of industrial side there. But of course, sometimes, again, it's still cheaper to do it by hand because to set up an assembly line to make it perfect, you need, in some instances, to plan out millions of units for it ever to pay for itself, right? And most people don't really think about that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just, I think the challenge is, and this is me being naive as well, getting into this, is like, oh yeah, I can automate this. And a part gets placed onto the machine with a robot. And what happens if there's a piece of dust or a piece of metal underneath the part, underneath where it's supposed to go? Now the part's going to get cut too deep, or the finish that's going to get applied, it's going to damage the wheel, the abrasive wheel, because it's expecting it to be a certain height. And all of a sudden, because there's something underneath it, it's now higher. And that's just like one way that it can get messed up, where the robot doesn't grip it properly, or there's just a number of ways for it to go wrong. So you're 100% right. It has to be, and a lot of times it makes, like for a million pieces, it 100% makes sense to do automation. And then you're also looking at different types of machines to do this.
In 1862, Franz Ludwig Loebner began his career making precision timekeepers in what would become Germany. Settling in Berlin, he received an official clockmaker's mandate from the king and quickly gravitated towards the then pioneering technology of creating precise instruments to measure short durations of time. In 1881, Loebner was already an exclusive mark thanks to their ability to mass-produce chronographs able to measure 1/100th of a second. Just a few years later, they developed a clock able to measure 1/1000th of a second for sports and scientific purposes. Loebner continued to be a recognized German leader in precise and reliable high-accuracy timekeeping into the 20th century. They were among the first to use highly precise electric switches to trigger their mechanical measuring devices in order to overcome the limitations of human response time. Loebner has now been revived for a modern era. The company continues its long legacy of creating precise and beautiful timing equipment for today's demanding users. The Loebner Steel Racer features a novel chronograph-focused dial with an eccentric reading of the time and a sliding crown guard system. The time-only Loebner Sledge model features a smaller 100-meter water-resistant case and a new inner rotating timing bezel system. Learn more about the history of precision timekeeping instruments and the new Loebner wristwatch collection at lbnr.com. How do you feel about the prospect of building a company that, instead of having a lot of automation, as we say, is more focused on, we'll call it the traditional approach of having a team of artisans who can do this relatively quickly because they have training, but essentially you do these production runs often through a lot of hands-on labor because it's the best way of doing it and it's the easiest way of doing it. And I think the reassuring thing is that you're going to be in a part of the world where there's going to be a labor market who are going to like these things. So I'm just curious if that's something you're interested in, because that's one way of scaling is by hiring people that you train as technicians. And so in addition to the stuff you like, you also need to you train these people, motivate these people, make sure that they get along. Maybe there's someone else at the company that does all those HR things. But I wonder if you've considered that as being one route to growth, because it seems like an opportunity you could take advantage of.
Absolutely. I'm definitely interested in getting some people in here to do finishing and to do assembly, quality control, as the operation grows. And I think the mentality that I have is, why would I have somebody doing a job that a robot can do? And the reason for this is not because I want to take a job away, but because I want to make someone's job better. And
faster.
Yeah, and it's also enjoyable. I worked at Swatch Group, and I know what it's like to do things over and over and over again. And there's some things that a robot could do well and then leave the things that someone would enjoy, such as maybe finishing a watch bridge, like beveling or whatever it may be, assembly, where you don't feel like a robot. Let the robot do it.
I think that's very important. There's a lot of people who are threatened by automation, but I've never seen anyone hand over a job to a robot and be like, you know what, I want that job back. Right? They're like, oh, I'm free to do something that seems more suited to my human intelligence that isn't a repeat thing. I think about a long time ago when there's, people aboard a ship who had to row. Okay, there's really no other way of moving the ship. And everyone there like, is this the best use of my potential, is to row? Like, you had to do it. The moment they had engines, that one's like, oh, you guys are doing it the engine way and not using the humans? You guys are really losing that touch. Like, people are like, oh my God, I'm so happy people don't need to do this. So it frees up people. There's so much to be done in watchmaking to have to do. I mean, the automation that I see in a lot of Swiss factories is literally just moving parts around. And before that automation, there was literally runners. They just had to pick up trays and move them around. It was like more boring than being the mail boy, right? It was just really, really bad. And the second they had those those robots that look like droids from Star Wars moving around doing it, no one missed doing that job. No one missed it.
Absolutely. It's just like artificial intelligence. I think there's a line in the sand. And the key is you have to utilize technology to make your life better. Otherwise, I think we're going down the wrong path. And you see a lot today of where it's questionable whether technology is being used for the right purposes. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it makes sense to use it where you need to have it. And you want to have people involved in this, because that's what makes this product so special, is somebody touches their watch or they put it on their wrist and they look at it and they're like, there was a human that assembled this or had a very big part in this. So it's just for anything that has to be autonomous and like very accurate. So hole drilling and making these the teeth on the wheels. Why would you want it to be less accurate is my question. And use the human intervention where it matters.
Now, there are certain parts which are known to be notoriously difficult to make. Hairsprings are sort of a good example. There's some other ones. Even making screws can be challenging. What are some things that you're just not going to take on? You're going to say, please go to others to get it. It's not going to make sense. I know that there's a big push of made in America, and it'd be great if we can make every part of a watch here. What are you just fundamentally not going to try because you don't think it's worth the time and effort?
Yeah, so I'm pretty much up for, so hairspring, I've done a lot of hairspring work and repair, and I've even made some proprietary tools for vibrating hairsprings, and I've got some stuff in the works for balancing balance wheels. However, it's tricky. It is very tricky, and there's no easy way to automate it. And without spending a crazy amount of money, and there's ways to do it in Switzerland. However, there's two routes, and it would either be lithography, so using silicon hairsprings or silicon escapement components in general, escape wheels, pallet forks, and there's a huge advantage there with anti-magnetism. And also the other route of just getting the wire, forming it, and this requires a lot of human intervention, and you have to match those springs to the wheels, which is the challenge. So I think the best way to go about this is really, I don't have any intentions on doing everything made here in America, just to say it's made in America. Not that I have anything against that whatsoever. I'm just interested in how can we make the highest quality product. And if it makes sense to do it, we do it. Otherwise, it's outsourced. And then just be transparent about where it's being made if anybody asks. And so that's pretty much my thoughts on that matter.
What would your thinking be if a foreign company came to you, someone in Asia or Europe, for example, said, hey, Zach, could you make us parts? Would you be open to that, or you want to focus on American stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I have had requests from other parts of the world, surprisingly, and always willing to take a look at a project and give it consideration.
In terms of the things that you're working on right now, I know that you can't talk about projects that are happening. You don't want to mention a lot of clients, but I think it would be interesting to talk about the types of thing you're doing. Are you simply trying to replicate a part that someone could get from China or from somewhere else? Or are you trying to make things that are not available elsewhere? I think it'd be interesting for you to share whatever you can reveal about some of the projects you're currently working on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share a few of the names of the projects I'm working on. Unfortunately, with some, I'm confined by NDAs, but the reason someone would come and reach out to me would be they can't either get it made anywhere because the quantities aren't high enough or the quality isn't high enough. Then there's the other side where some parts don't make sense for me to make one of, such as screws. If it's being made on a screw machine, it takes a very long time to set up this machine, 3 days specifically for a basic screw. And you have to buy material, you have to buy collets, all these things. So it'd be the most expensive screw you'd buy. So it makes sense to make 1,000 or 2,000, 3,000, and a lot of small brands don't feel the need to commit to that many parts. But then there's other components where it's not a huge deal if it can be milled. But I don't mean to get too much into the weeds here. The real reason someone would reach out to me would be those first two reasons, really, and could also be that they want to do the entire project with me and they want it under one roof.
Well, what can you say about the types of problems you're trying to overcome? Because I know that you're working on some components that don't necessarily exist. People are going to have products that they can sell on the market that have new features and things like that. I know maybe it's a tricky line here, but I just want you to get people excited a little bit. So when they say this was done in collaboration with our precision, like, oh, that's more than just a more expensive version of that same part you can get elsewhere. And again, I'm glad that's not what you want to do. But I think that also you need to inspire someone's curiosity a little bit by sharing, what will some of the outcomes of their projects be?
Absolutely. So one of your previous guests, Matt Zinsky, he owns Tipsum. We worked together to develop a dual time complication. And this is going to be released. I think the release date is in March. Don't hold me to it. Yeah,
he talked about it as well. So I guess you can talk about that one.
Okay. Yeah. So this was quite an effort to do the design. And there were many iterations of this before getting it right. And really exciting project. It was cool to be able to work with him and to be able to get some credit for this, since everything is really hush-hush usually. So that was really cool. I'm really passionate about this watch because of just the overall complexity of making some of these components, from the dual time wheel, the 12-hour wheel, being laser welded together to milling some of these really tiny pinions. And having overcome those parts and also being able to do semi-automation with some of the components really made it exciting. There's some other work that I'm working on with Alex Voss. He's a new brand. He doesn't have a social media presence yet. And he has a very, very exciting timepiece that I believe is going to be released this year, I think. You'll have to leave it to him. I don't know if I'm overstepping my boundaries by saying this, but we spent a lot of time reverse engineering an IWC 89 movement and making the components here. So plates, bridges, wheels. It was quite an effort. It took 3 years to do this, and a lot of money and time. And the watch came out really, really nice. He's still making some changes to the final version of the prototype before we move forward. And the last project I'm working on that I can talk about is with the Cornell Watch Company. And that's a fun project that is going to be made at scale. So it is something that can be scaled. And we're starting at a 250 pieces. And the case, the dial, the bezel, crown, everything except for the movement, the hands, everything except for the movement is made here in the US. And we're extremely excited about this project. This is going to be released this year as well.
That's really cool. I think what I want to comment on is the apparent entrepreneurialism and shared investment. You know, you and these brands are all investing in these products that, if successful, will allow you to grow and get to the next step of where you want to be. You're not able to do it by working with foreign companies, not because you haven't tried, but because they don't really want to. I think it's common for Switzerland to want to keep money in Switzerland. They also want to keep the art form in Switzerland, though I think they're somewhat short-sighted about it. Many companies in Asia just have places they can already go to, right? There's plenty of stuff there for them to rely on, which is great. So you guys all have this vision. You want to make the parts. There's an artistic side to it. There's a sales side to it. And you are all investing time and money for several years because you think that there's growth to be made in the watch industry. And I think it's very interesting how these types of business relationships and networks come about. These people, these ideas, they couldn't get their stuff made elsewhere. If they wanted to go to Switzerland, they would either have a no answer or be too expensive. In Asia, they may not get the attention to detail they need or the small number of parts that they need. You are, again, investing with them because you could charge more, right? You could easily say, that's too little for me. But you are curious about what it could be like to grow with them. And I think it's important to recognize that your group, and there's many actually, especially in America, groups of, I don't know, between 3 and maybe 6 or 7 companies, which there's a retail arm, there's a manufacturing arm, there's a design arm, who are saying, working together, we can do this. And it's small versions of the larger collective mentality that they have in Switzerland, where the brands and suppliers sort of all work together. And what's interesting is that popping up here slowly but surely in the United States, it's quite organic. I think there's still an evolutionary process. I think some of these groups will merge and maybe not all of them will make it. But at the end of the day, there's an understanding that there's consumers out there that want these things and that the relatively closed system of Switzerland or the relatively rigid system of Asian manufacturing isn't serving a lot of the entrepreneurial interests well. I know I've talked a lot. I want to let you chat, but any responses to that or anything you would add to that?
Yeah, it's challenging. Switzerland, it's usually time frame. It takes long to get responces.
Define that, because I think that they're like, what? 6 months isn't that long.
Yeah, it does take a while to make watches. I guess it depends on the request and the size of the company, and they also have commitments to other maybe bigger projects and that's usually the reason. And people that are much smaller are trying to make requests, and they either overcommit or the time frame, and they weren't upfront about it at first. There is some good quality that comes from Asia. I think you just have to find it. And I don't have any experience, but I would imagine if you have a good liaison over there, it would be easier to do such a thing. This is just what I've heard with some of the brands that I've worked with, where they're getting some components. In
Asia and Switzerland, having a person on the ground infinitely helps you.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, go on.
Yep. So, I mean, you pretty much touched on the areas there of why you would want to do something here. The sense of urgency is a little higher. I'm not working with any crazy huge companies in the watch industry. I am working with some big companies with my contract manufacturing arm. However, it's relatively easy to get a hold of me and get responses when you're trying to ask, where is this, or why is this happening, or when can I expect this?
So in terms of growing, you're obviously motivated and you're intuitive when it comes to a lot of this. You have a lot of the characteristics which will allow you to grow. But one of the difficult things, of course, is in allocating your time and having people help you in the business end. Where are you thinking about getting the help or the learning that you need to grow? Because what I want is to see every company like yours succeed because you're well organized, choose the right products, the market knows enough about you, companies want to come to you, what are, as you said, it's a challenge. What are you doing to prepare for some of the upcoming steps that will require some big decisions?
So this year, one of the really big things that I did was it was the end of last year. I hired an accounting firm and I have a CFO now.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. That's handling a lot of the accounting work, bookkeeping, and really all of the heavy lifting on the financial side of the business. It's something that I really didn't mind doing while I was small, but just as I grew and now starting to work on all these projects, you think you can do everything until you realize there's an easier way and you try it and you're just like, gosh, why didn't I do this 2 years ago? This would have made so much more sense. And same thing goes for process development. I have a joint partnership with a gentleman who's named Michael. He works with me in the office and he has his own company. And being able to lean on individuals that have 35 years of experience in industry and have and just boatloads of experience with many different processes is a way that now I don't have to spend as much time with my head in any particular process. So I would say, and then also design, like thinking I could do design. I'm not a designer. I can do engineering design, but as far as graphics or any of these components,
it's a different job. It's a totally different job.
Totally different job. It's the same reason you'd hire someone for marketing or a publicist. And these are all really, really important jobs that you need to lean on people to do. And this is how I'm becoming more efficient, is just kind of noticing what I'm good at and only focusing on that. And just, you really have to pay to move forward. And it's challenging because I started with broken machines, bootstrapping. My latest machine that I bought, it wasn't like the first machine at all. It cost as much as a house, but you have to just take risks sometimes if the business is moving in the direction that it needs to go, and you have to realize what you have to do.
This reminds me of a kind of funny observation about how in Switzerland at the factories that I've been to many of them, these types of roles are distinguished by costume. There's 3 costumes that you'll see. I call them costumes at these brands. And this helps show how these 3 areas not only involve their own distinct labor, but just fundamentally different mentality goes into each of them. So this is in no particular order, but you have the watchmaker costume, right, which is the watchmaker sort of robe, the white robe. Maybe some slight differences, but this is the class of people that essentially build the watches, finish the watches, the sort of delicate work, the artisanal work, clean rooms, very quiet usually, right? That's a big part of the company. And then you have what I call the administration executives. There you have more, business attire, business casual, no robes, wearing, again, what you would say is office attire. And these people are making creative decisions, sales, right? And then you have the factory level, right? And this is work attire, okay? Work boots, dirty, oil rags, a little bit more gruff, loud sounds, smells, danger signs, whole different culture going on. They're focused on doing it right, getting out there on time, being there on time, production numbers, low failure rate, low rejection rate, total, not creative, just like practical, we're mining. And again, these 3 costumes represent entirely different cultures, but all of this is the minimum you need for a watch brand, right?
Yep.
So you're 100%. Kind of amused. Is this a funny observation?
You're dead nuts. Like, it's right on.
So you're not going to have the watchmakers robes. You're not going to have the business casual. You're going to be, the factory and all the manifestation of that. And so that's the culture you're growing. And the factory receives the designs. They're not like, hey, factory, what would be a pretty dial? They're like, we don't know. That's not what we're here for. Like, we're here to make it. So you receive that. Someone gives you, this is what we want, our precision. And you're like, okay, it's our job to make it fast, make it right, make it cheap. That's what we do. That's the factory culture, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The challenge is getting good drawings in the watch industry.
Drawings.
Good drawings, good technical drawings. And
why is that?
I think you have either watchmakers that learned in watchmaking school, if they did go to watchmaking school, the very basic level of creating technical drawings. versus when you go to trade school or you go to college or have some sort of education or you're self-taught to be able to learn how to create proper drawings. It's typically the GD&T, it's like the dimensioning and the tolerances, and that's left out. Or you end up with like a napkin sketch. I've gotten some napkin sketches in my email. So that's challenging to work off of, or there's no 3D models. So I essentially have to spend days or weeks sometimes to draw some of these parts. So I'll send them a quote of what it'll cost. And they're like, well, that's too expensive. And I was like, well, you could just send a proper drawing and then we can make it. But if we can't make it if we don't have a proper drawing. So that's a major challenge.
Can you undertake that knowing that clients need that service? Does it make sense to be like, well, we can do that for you and it's not going to be my own time? Like, is it like in terms of growing, you always think about what services the clients need, because it's easy to say, come back to us when you have that, right? But then you're sort of leaving business on the table, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It just depends on what it is. If it's something as simple as a screw, no problem. I can do that for you. It's not time consuming.
Okay.
If you want me to draw an entire main plate, I'm happy to do it, but it's going to cost some money to be able to accomplish it because it's very time consuming.
Is that an area where technology can help? I hate to just bring up AI, but it seems that the once time-consuming approach of taking a napkin drawing and trying to make a technical specification out of it, while a human still could do it, is that the type of thing that you could put software intelligence on that do the grunt work and then you just sort of check it over afterwards?
It's not there yet.
Not there.
There are some companies that are working on AI, such as doing AI toolpaths. So, for instance, you have a drawing, which is CAD, computer aided design, and then you have CAM, which is what the machines understand. So, someone like myself has to sit there and make the toolpath around the lines. So, if it's a dial, it's the outer part of a dial, basically, it's a circle. You have to draw the tool path of where that cutting tool is going to follow the circle. So there is AI that is being used to accomplish this.
Because it's tedious as hell, right?
It's very tedious, yeah. But the AI being used for this is being used for very basic parts that are industrial, like big stuff, really big parts.
Isn't that the dream where you can communicate more effectively, right? What people don't understand is that you basically need to use programming code that's not natural English in programming these machines, which is a whole skill unto itself. Programming CNC machines is a job. There's full-on people that's their career, right?
Yeah. And the challenge is so, for instance, I have seven, maybe eight. I'd have to count. It's been changed. It's grown. I think 8 CNC machines in my shop, and all the kerns, I have 3 kerns here. All 3 of those use the same language. And then there's other 2 machines. They also use their own language.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So like the machine for making the screws, all of that is programmed by hand. So I'm physically writing the code for that versus on the kerns and the other milling machine that I have here. I can pretty much use software to generate most of this code, but you still need to go through it and make sure it's not going to crash or do something silly.
So what I say to people, and I think this is sort of a good area to end, we'll have to have more conversations, is you said earlier a comment which I thought was amusing. It's not the Daniels way, right? You're talking about George Daniels. His books on watchmaking encourage people to do it sort of the old-fashioned way by hand. But, he came from the generation before this machinery, and he didn't understand that machinery wasn't just automation of something that used to be human. It is now embarking in new areas to do things that you could never do traditionally. And the amount of hand labor does not decrease. It increases, right? Like you have to learn even more skills, like this computer code and how to operate these machines properly. So while there may be less romance because you're not like hunched over a bench, scraping something, there's no less amount of artisanship that needs to go into the creation of a lot of these things. And if you respect historic watchmaking for the hands-on element, you don't need to appreciate modern watchmaking any less because of fear that there's less hands-on element. Look, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of stuff out there which is made in an automated way. But again, I think that a closer examination will allow you to appreciate that this is still a very human labor intensive task. And no one, as you said, is just pushing a green button, watches are popping out. This doesn't happen anywhere.
No,
even the cheapest watches have a surprising number of hands touching them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to believe that Daniel's or any of these, he's one of the greats. There's no doubt about it. I have a lot of respect for his work, and I have his book. I started with this, and I still use some of the methods from that book. However, they would be using CNC machines today.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's just a matter of being conscious of your time. And it's not because you're trying to do it in a way that's lazy. It actually makes it more affordable, and you can do a better job because now you can focus. It's just like me running my business. I can focus my efforts instead of doing the financials, doing marketing, doing the design. I can focus on one thing and do it really, really well. So it makes the product better, in my opinion.
Let's talk about the watch industry itself. You're obviously hyper-focused on your area. There's people that want to build things, but you, of course, notice what's going on. The luxury industry is, of course, affected by larger geopolitical factors, which is really out of our direct industry's control, yet it's highly influenced on that. What are some of your feelings about the long-term trajectory? Watchmaking is still going to be needed. But again, there's a lot of people that have a lot of uncertainty. I think that you're more insulated because you're not selling watches, you're not buying wholesale and things like that. But as someone who is well connected and understand what's going on, what are some of the personal emotions and observations you have about today's watch industry and where you think things are going to be in 3, 4, 5 years?
Yeah, sure. So having been in the wholesale industry where we were processing tons of watches, selling them to big companies, and then also selling to other dealers and small jewelry stores, the economy definitely changes the course of this because people are no longer buying watches when at least, $5,000 to $15,000 or $20,000 watches when there's recession. And much like fine art, I think it's different depending on the price range that you're looking to spend money in for some of these pieces. However, I think the industry in the US is, in the next 5 years, it's going to change quite a bit. Watchmaking isn't going to go anywhere. Watchmakers are always going to have a job. There's no shortage of work for watchmakers. While there's a big shortage of watchmakers. So this is only causing these companies to want to hire more watchmakers. So I think it's a really good industry to get involved in. And as far as manufacturing goes, my plan is 10 years. I think it's going to take 10 years for any real thing to happen. And I said this a few years ago when I started making parts, and it's happening a lot faster than I anticipated. I didn't expect to be doing work like I'm doing now. I'm pretty realistic when it comes to choosing or making decisions for jobs or just overall course of where I'm trying to take the business. And it's really interesting seeing the demand for independent pieces. And this is what I'm really, really, really excited about. I've seen so much of the name brand watches, and don't get me wrong, I still wear them. I like them. There's a place for everything in the market, but I get really, really excited with my involvement or without my involvement about the independents. And I think this is really going to grow more. And I'm hoping it grows more here in the States.
I agree with you. I think it will. Your business is Our Precision with an H, and the website is ourprecision.com. This has been the Superlative podcast interview with Zach Smith, the founder. Zach, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ariel. Really enjoyed it.